The autumn festival in
Stay
Riverside
close
should have
to
been
me.
beautiful.
I am. Where are we
Golden
going?
leaves spiraled
To the river.
through
We
crisp
must hurry.
October air. Children chased each other between vendor stalls, and the scent of cinnamon and apples drifted across the town square. Laughter rose and fell like music warm and careless, the sound of people who belonged. Araminta Ashworth did not belong. She stood at the edge of the crowd, 23 years old, and already broken by life, her worn apron still damp from her shift at the diner. Her hands were red and raw from scrubbing dishes in water, too hot, her shoes stitched together twice by her own careful fingers. She had come to the festival only because her younger brother Jasper had begged, his eyes bright with the kind of hope she could never deny him. Jasper sat beside her now in his wheelchair, 16 years old, and smiling despite everything. Despite the accident 4 years ago that had stolen his ability to walk. Despite the poverty that kept them trapped in a 2-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and a mother who drank to forget she had children at all. Despite a sister who carried guilt like a second skin. Minta reached down and squeezed his shoulder. He looked up at her, and for a moment the world seemed gentler. Then Isolde Merriweather's voice cut through the afternoon like a blade. There she is, the thief. The word landed heavy and final. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Within seconds, a circle had formed around Minta and Jasper, a human wall of curiosity and judgment. Isolde Merriweather stood at the center of it all, 60 years old, and draped in expensive wool, her silver hair styled in perfect waves. She was the wealthiest woman in Riverside, owner of the textile mill that employed half the town. When Isolde spoke, people listened. When Isolde pointed, people looked, and she was pointing directly at Minta. That girl, Isolde announced, her voice carrying across the square, stole my grandmother's silver brooch. I had it this morning when I hired her to serve at my garden party. Now it's gone. Minta's heart stopped. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. This could not be happening. Not here. Not in front of everyone. I didn't. She finally managed, her voice small and trembling. Mrs. Merriweather, I didn't touch anything. I only served tea and cleared plates. I never went near your jewelry. Isolde's smile was cold and surgical. She turned to the crowd, playing to them like an actress on stage. Of course she denies it. They always do. Someone in the crowd muttered agreement. Someone else laughed. Minta felt the weight of their eyes like stones. Check her pockets, a voice called out. Make her empty her apron, another added. Isolde raised one elegant hand. Officer Brennan, would you be so kind? The town's single police officer stepped forward, his face uncomfortable but resigned. He was a kind man, Officer Brennan, but kindness had limits when your salary depended on people like Isolde Merriweather. Miss Ashworth, he said quietly, I need you to empty your pockets. Just a formality. Minta's hands shook as she reached into her apron. She pulled out a crumpled receipt from the diner, $3 bills, in tips, a broken hair tie. Nothing else. Relief started to bloom in her chest. Then Officer Brennan's hand went to the pocket on the other side of her apron, the one she never used because the stitching was torn. His fingers emerged holding a silver brooch, ornate and antique, catching the afternoon light. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted. The world tilted. I didn't, Minta whispered, staring at the brooch as if it were a serpent. I didn't put that there. I swear I never saw it before. Please, you have to believe me. But no one was listening. The crowd's murmur rose to a roar. Words crashed over her like waves. Knew she was trouble. Always thought there was something off about that family. Poor thing's desperate, that's all. Desperate doesn't excuse stealing. Jasper tried to wheel himself forward, his young face twisted with fury. My sister didn't steal anything. Someone put it there. Can't you see she's being set up? A hand shot out and pushed his wheelchair. Jasper tilted backward, arms flailing. The chair tipped and he crashed to the cobblestones, his head striking the ground with a sickening crack. Minta screamed and dropped to her knees beside him. Blood seeped from a cut above his eyebrow, bright red against his pale skin. She pressed her hand to the wound, her own blood roaring in her ears. Jasper, look at me. Stay with me. Around them, the crowd had gone silent. Someone whispered that they should call an ambulance, but no one moved. They simply watched 100 pairs of eyes that saw everything and did nothing. Officer Brennan cleared his throat. Miss Ashworth, I'm going to have to take you to the station. My brother needs a hospital, Minta said, her voice breaking. Please, he's bleeding. Someone will see to the boy. Isolde's voice was crisp, efficient, bored. Officer, do your duty. Minta was pulled to her feet. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, the metal cold and unyielding. She looked back at Jasper as she was led away. He was crying now, trying to sit up, calling her name. The last thing she heard before being pushed into the police car was the crowd's chant rhythmic and cruel words that would follow her for the rest of her life. Worthless, worthless, worthless. The cell was small and gray and smelled of mildew and despair. Minta sat on the thin mattress and stared at the cinder block wall, her mind circling the same thoughts like water down a drain. She had not stolen the brooch. Someone had planted it, Isolde herself most likely, or one of her servants following orders. But why? What had Minta done to deserve this calculated cruelty? She had served tea with quiet efficiency. She had kept her eyes down and her voice soft. She had been exactly what people expected her to be. Perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps being what they expected had never been enough. The night stretched long and cold. No one came except Officer Brennan, who brought her a sandwich she could not eat and would not meet her eyes. At some point she heard him on the phone, his voice drifting through the station's thin walls. "Yes, Mrs. Merriweather, I understand. Charges dropped. Yes, ma'am, very gracious of you." In the morning they released her without explanation or apology. Officer Brennan handed her back her apron, her $3 bills, her broken hair tie. The silver brooch had vanished, presumably returned to its rightful owner, evidence of a crime that had never happened. "You're free to go," he said, still not looking at her. Minta walked home through streets that felt hostile and strange. People she had known her entire life crossed to the other side of the road when they saw her coming. Mrs. Chen, who owned the bakery and had always saved Minta the day-old bread, turned her back and locked her door. The mailman, who usually waved, pretended she did not exist. By the time she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, the word had spread through Riverside like poison in water. Thief, criminal, worthless. Her mother, Rowena, was passed out on the couch, an empty bottle on the floor beside her. She did not stir when Minta entered. She rarely did anymore. Jasper was in his room, a bandage over his eyebrow, his eyes red from crying. When he saw Minta, he wheeled himself forward and grabbed her hand. "I knew you'd come back," he said. "I told them you didn't do it. I told everyone." Minta knelt beside him and pulled him into her arms. He was thin and fragile, her baby brother, who had once run faster than anyone in his grade, who had dreamed of playing soccer professionally, whose life had shattered the same night hers had. 4 years ago, the car accident. Minta had been 19, driving home late from her second job. Jasper had been 12, asleep in the passenger seat. She had been tired, so tired her eyes kept drifting shut. She had not seen the patch of ice until it was too late. The car had spun, then flipped. When Minta woke in the hospital, bruised but whole, the doctors told her Jasper would never walk again. Spinal damage. Permanent. Her father had died in a mining accident 8 years ago when she was 15. Her mother had started drinking that same year and never stopped. Now it was just the 3 of them, drowning in a town that had already decided they were not worth saving. "Minta," Jasper whispered against her shoulder. "What are we going to do?" She held him tighter and lied the way she always did. "Everything's going to be okay. I promise." But she did not believe it. Not anymore. The diner fired her the next morning. They called it budget cuts, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted a thief serving their food. The laundry service, where she worked her second job, let her go the same afternoon, the owner apologizing but firm. "It's not personal, Araminta. It's business. My customers are asking questions." Within 48 hours, Minta had lost both her jobs, her reputation, and any hope of finding work in Riverside. She spent 3 days walking from shop to shop, restaurant to restaurant, begging for anything. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, cleaning toilets. It did not matter. Every door closed before she could finish speaking. On the 4th day, she sold her winter coat to pay the rent. On the 5th day, she sold her father's watch, the only thing she had left of him. On the 6th day, she realized they would be evicted by the end of the month. Jasper needed a new wheelchair. His current one was breaking down the wheel, grinding the frame bent. He needed physical therapy that insurance would not cover. He needed hope, and Minta could not give him any. She sat on their apartment's fire escape that evening, watching the sun set over Riverside. The sky burned gold and crimson, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in town, people were having dinner with their families, laughing, planning futures, living lives that did not include her. Araminta Ashworth was 23 years old, and she had already learned the cruelest lesson the world could teach. Some people mattered, some people did not. And once the world decided which category you belonged to, there was no climbing out. She closed her eyes and let the autumn wind cut through her thin shirt. She did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears changed nothing. Below her, the town glittered with electric light. Above her, the first stars emerged, cold and distant and utterly uncaring. The charity gala at Merriweather Manor was exactly what Minta expected. Crystal chandeliers, imported wine, a string quartet playing in the corner. Women in silk gowns and men in tailored suits moved through the grand hall like royalty, their laughter polished and bright. Minta moved through them like a ghost. She had been hired for the evening by the catering company, a one-night job that paid $40. She needed the money desperately enough to swallow her pride and return to the house of the woman who had destroyed her life. Isolde Merriweather had not objected. If anything, she seemed amused. How delightful, Isolde had said when Minta arrived at the servants' entrance. The thief returns to the scene of the crime. Do try not to steal the silverware, dear. The other servers had laughed. Minta had kept her eyes down and said nothing. Now she carried a tray of champagne through the crowd, invisible and silent. She had perfected the art of being nothing, of taking up no space, of moving through the world so carefully that people forgot she was human at all. She was refilling her tray at the bar when she first saw him. He stood alone near the tall windows that overlooked the garden, a man who seemed to exist in a different dimension than everyone else in the room. Tall and lean, dressed in black from head to toe, his clothing expensive, but old-fashioned in a way Minta could not quite name. His hair was dark and swept back from a face that was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful. Sharp, pale, elegant, dangerous. He was not drinking. He was not speaking to anyone. He simply stood and watched the party with eyes that seemed to see through everything. Minta felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction exactly, though he was striking enough to draw every eye in the room. No, it was something else. Recognition, perhaps. The way one outsider recognizes another. He did not belong here either. She could see it in the way he held himself separate and apart, as if he were observing humanity from a great distance. Their eyes met across the room. His were gray, the color of winter clouds, and they held hers for a long moment. Then someone stepped between them and the connection broke. Minta shook herself. She had work to do. $40 to earn. She lifted her tray and moved back into the crowd. She was halfway across the grand hall when Isolde Merriweather materialized in front of her wine glass, in hand, a cruel smile on her lips. Araminta, Isolde purred loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Fetch me another glass of the Bordeaux, would you, and do try to be quick about it. Unlike some people, I have standards. Minta nodded, throat tight. Yes, ma'am. She turned toward the bar. She did not see Isolde's foot slide out. She did not see the intentional stumble that sent her careening forward. She only felt the moment her tray tilted, the moment the full glass of red wine flew from her grasp, the moment it arced through the air in terrible slow motion and landed directly on the black coat of the man by the window. The room fell silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Every head turned. Minta stared in horror at the spreading crimson stain across the man's shoulder and chest. The wine dripped down the expensive fabric, dark as blood. Oh my God, she breathed. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She grabbed a napkin from the nearest table and reached toward him, hands shaking. He did not move. He simply looked down at the ruin of his coat, then up at her. His eyes were calm, almost amused. Behind her, Isolde gasped with theatrical horror. Araminta Ashworth, do you have any idea what you've done? That coat is worth more than you'll earn in a year. She turned to the room, voice rising. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Hiring someone with her reputation was clearly a mistake. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered the word thief. Someone else laughed. Minta felt the familiar sting of tears and forced them back. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. I'll pay for it, she said, though the words were absurd. The coat probably cost $10,000. She did not have $10 to her name. Isolde moved closer, predatory and pleased. Oh, you'll pay all right. That coat is a custom piece from a London tailor. $15,000. You can pay in full or I'll have Officer Brennan arrest you for destruction of property. I'm sure a judge would love to hear about your history of sticky fingers. The room pressed in. Minta could not breathe. This was it, the final humiliation. She would be arrested again, maybe jailed this time. Jasper would be alone with their mother. They would lose the apartment. Everything would fall apart. Actually, a voice said, quiet and clear, and carrying the weight of absolute authority, that won't be necessary. The man in the ruined coat stepped forward. Up close, he was even more striking. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, marked by a stillness that made Minta think of ancient things, of churches, of graves. He looked at Isolde with eyes that seemed to see straight through her designer gown into the smallness beneath. The coat is replaceable. he said, his voice soft but somehow filling the entire room. Her dignity is not. Isolde blinked momentarily thrown. I beg your pardon. I said the coat is replaceable. He turned to Minta and his expression gentled. What's your name? She could barely speak. Araminta, or Araminta Ashworth, but people call me Minta. Minta, he repeated as if tasting the name. A beautiful name. Did you spill wine on me intentionally? No, of course not. I would never. Then there's nothing to forgive. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a money clip thick with bills, and handed $500 to the catering supervisor. For her trouble, and for her silence regarding Mrs. Merriweather's rather theatrical performance this evening. The supervisor took the money eyes wide. The man turned to Isolde. His smile was cold. As for you, madam, I suggest you reconsider your hobby of tormenting those less fortunate. Karma has a long memory and a talent for poetic justice. Then he walked away, moving through the crowd that parted before him like water. The string quartet started playing again. Conversations resumed. Within minutes, it was as if nothing had happened at all. Except Minta stood frozen, heart pounding, the ghost of his attention still warm on her skin. She did not know his name. She did not know who he was. But she knew with the certainty of a drowning person spotting land that her life had just changed. 3 days passed. Minta returned to her ball-desperate existence, but something was different now. She could not stop thinking about the man in the black coat, about the way he had looked at her, truly looked as if she were a person worth seeing. No one had looked at her that way in years. On the 4th day, he walked into the diner where she had once worked. Minta was there because the new owner had grudgingly rehired her for the graveyard shift midnight to 6 in the morning when no customers would see her. She was wiping down tables at 2 a.m. when the door opened without sound. The bell above the door did not ring. The cold November wind did not enter. But he was suddenly there, standing just inside the doorway, dressed in the same dark coat but now perfectly clean, as if the wine had never touched it. For a moment, Minta thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Then he smiled and took a seat at the corner booth. She approached on shaking legs, notepad in hand. Can I get you something, sir? Tea, he said. Black, no sugar. She nodded and moved to the counter. Her hands trembled as she poured the hot water. When she brought the cup to his table, he was watching her with those calm gray eyes. Thank you, Araminta, he said. She froze. How did you know my real name? I didn't tell you. You did, he said gently, at the party, and I have an excellent memory. She set down the tea and stepped back, but he raised one hand. Sit with me, he said. Please, just for a moment. She glanced around the empty diner. Her shift supervisor was in the back, probably asleep. There were no other customers. No one to see or judge. She sat. He did not touch the tea. He simply looked at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. You live in pain, he said quietly. It was not a question. Minta's throat tightened. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice was impossibly gentle. I see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself as if trying to take up no space at all. Someone has told you that you are worthless. Many someones, perhaps, and you have started to believe them. Tears burned behind her eyes. She looked away. Why are you here? She whispered. Because 3 days ago I watched you apologize for something that was not your fault. I watched you offer to pay for damage you did not cause. I watched you stand in a room full of people who had already condemned you, and you did not fight back. You did not scream or rage or demand as justice. He paused. You simply accepted their cruelty as if it were your due. I don't have a choice, Minta said, voice breaking. That's what people like you don't understand. When you're people like me, fighting back just makes it worse. People like me, he repeated, something sad flickering across his face. What do you think I am, Minta? She finally looked at him, really looked, and she saw it then, the thing she had missed before. The way his skin was too pale, too perfect. The way he moved with a grace that was not quite human. The way the shadows seemed to gather around him, fond and familiar. I don't know, she admitted, but you're not like everyone else. He smiled, and it transformed his face. No, I'm not. He reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, heavy stock, with elegant engraving. He slid it across the table. I need an archivist, he said. Someone to organize my library. The pay is $2,000 a week. The work is light, mostly sorting books and maintaining records. You would have your own quarters if you wished them. Your brother would be welcome as well. Minta stared at the card. It read simply, Dorian Sinclair Thorne. Beneath that, an address she did not recognize. Nightshade Estate. I don't understand, she said. You don't know me. Why would you offer me this? Because strength should be rewarded, not punished, he said, and because I recognize a survivor when I see one. He stood, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a $5 cup of tea he had not touched. The offer stands, he said. Come to the estate tomorrow at noon if you wish to accept. Or don't. The choice is yours, Minta. It always has been. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the diner with a business card that felt like a lifeline, and a question that would not stop echoing in her mind. Who was Dorian Sinclair Thorne? And why did he care about a girl the world had labeled worthless? She did not sleep that night. By the time her shift ended and dawn broke cold and gray over Riverside, she had made her decision. She went to the estate. The Nightshade Estate stood beyond the veil like a monument to impossible things. Minta had accepted Dorian's offer, worked in his library for 6 weeks, and in that time discovered 3 truths that changed everything. First, that Dorian Sinclair Thorne was not merely wealthy but ancient, a vampire king who had ruled for 350 years. Second, that he was dying from a curse placed upon him 2 centuries ago. Third, that he had asked her to marry him, not for love, for redemption. I'm dying. Ang. He had said that evening in the library, his gray eyes shadowed with grief older than nations. I have 3 months, perhaps less. Minta had stared at him, this impossibly beautiful man who had given her employment and dignity when the world offered neither. 3 months. There is a curse, he had continued quietly, an old one, and you, Minta, might be the only person who can break it. But I would need to ask something of you that I have no right to ask. What? Marriage, a true marriage recognized by vampire law. If you agree, your brother will receive the finest medical care in any realm. You will have security for life. And when I am gone, you will inherit enough to ensure you never suffer poverty again. She had been silent for a long time, processing the impossible. Finally, she had asked the only question that mattered. Why me? His answer had been simple and devastating. Because you understand what it means to be called worthless when you are anything but. The wedding had been a nightmare dressed in ceremony. The entire town of Riverside had attended not to celebrate, but to witness what they assumed would be Minta's final humiliation. They laughed when she walked down the aisle in a simple dress that Dorian had chosen for her, laughed when the minister asked if anyone objected, laughed when Isolde Merriweather stood in the front pew and declared this union a disgrace. Then the carriages had arrived. 8 of them, black as midnight, drawn by horses that seemed carved from shadow. Royal guards in obsidian armor, and Lady Callista Mordain stepping from the lead carriage like winter-made flesh, her voice cutting through the chapel with surgical precision. This union violates royal protocol. Under Article 12 of the Sovereign Mandate, a human bride must prove worthiness through the 4 trials of the crown within 90 days, or the marriage is void, and she is exiled from the realm. Dorian had turned to Minta, then his gray eyes steady and sad. You don't have to do this, he had whispered. Say the word, and I'll end this charade right now. But Minta had looked past him at the crowd of Riverside residents, at their sneering faces and judgmental eyes, at Isolde's triumphant smile. She had looked at Jasper in his wheelchair, watching with hope and fear warring on his young face, and she had made her choice. I accept the trials. Now, 3 days after the wedding, she stood in the entrance hall of Nightshade Palace and tried to comprehend the new world she had entered. The palace existed beneath the earth, accessed through a shimmering barrier Dorian called the Veil. It was a kingdom unto itself, carved from obsidian and lit by crystals that glowed with their own pale light. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, its ceiling lost in shadow. Tapestries older than nations hung on the walls. The air smelled of stone and time and secrets kept for centuries. 200 servants moved through the corridors like whispers. They bowed when Minta passed, but their eyes held questions. What was this human girl doing here? How long until she failed? How long until she broke? Dorian had given her the east wing, a suite of rooms so vast she got lost trying to find the bedroom. He took the west wing for himself, half a palace away. Separate, formal, exactly as he had promised. We are married in name only, he had said on their wedding night, standing in the doorway of her new chambers. You owe me nothing, Minta. Not your time, not your affection, certainly not your body. These trials are Callista's invention, not mine. If they become too much, tell me. We'll find another way. But there was no other way. Minta understood that now. Dorian had 3 months to live when he proposed. If she failed the trials, the marriage would be annulled, and the curse would continue its work. He would fade like morning frost in sunlight, becoming nothing. She could not let that happen. On her second day in the palace, they brought Jasper through the veil. He arrived in a medical transport, his eyes wide with wonder and fear, and was taken immediately to the medical wing. Minta waited outside the examination room, pacing the marble floors until her feet ached. When the doctors finally emerged, their expressions were carefully neutral. Your brother's condition is complex, the head physician said. He was a vampire, ancient and dignified, with the kind of calm that came from centuries of practice. The spinal damage is severe, but not irreparable. Minta's breath caught. What are you saying? We can help him. The treatment will take months, perhaps a year. But there is a chance, Lady Ashworth. A genuine chance that he might walk again. She had to sit down. Her legs would not hold her. The physician placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his touch cold but kind. We begin tomorrow, he said. For now your brother is resting comfortably. You may see him if you wish. She found Jasper in a room 3 times the size of their entire apartment in Riverside. He was propped up in a bed with silk sheets, staring at the vaulted ceiling with an expression of disbelief. When he saw her, he smiled. Minta, they say I might walk again. They say there's a chance. She crossed to him and took his hand. I know. How is this real? His voice cracked. How is any of this real? I don't know, she admitted. But it is. We're here. We're safe, and you're going to get better. He squeezed her fingers. You married a vampire king for me, didn't you? She started to deny it, then stopped. Jasper was 16, not 6. He deserved the truth. I married him because he's the only person who ever treated me like I mattered, she said quietly. And yes, because this way, you have a chance at the life you should have had, the life I took from you. The accident wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, bound by years of guilt and love and sacrifice. Finally, Jasper spoke again. These trials, Minta, what if you can't pass them? She thought of Dorian dying slowly in his wing of the palace. She thought of the curse that had plagued him for 200 years. She thought of Callista Mordane's cold eyes and the impossible task laid before her. Then I'll fail, she said, but I won't fail without trying. Lady Callista Mordane came to see her on the 14th day. Minta was in the library attempting to read a book on vampire history and making little progress. The words swam before her eyes, heavy with dread. Tomorrow the first trial would begin. She did not know what it would entail. Dorian had tried to tell her, but Callista's protocols forbade it. The trials must be faced without preparation, Dorian had said, frustration clear in his voice. It's meant to test your natural character, not your ability to study and rehearse. Now Callista swept into the library like a storm in human form. She was tall and regal, dressed in midnight blue that made her pale skin seem luminous. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that was beautiful in the way sculptures were beautiful. Perfect, cold, timeless. Lady Ashworth, she said, the title sounding like an insult in her mouth. I thought we should speak before tomorrow. Minta stood, setting the book aside. Lady Mordane, do you know why I instituted the 4 trials? Callista did not wait for an answer. Because I have watched Dorian destroy himself with guilt for 2 centuries. I have watched him give away his fortune, his time, his very life force to atone for sins he committed as a young king. And I have watched human after human take advantage of his generosity. I'm not taking advantage, Minta said quietly. Aren't you? Callista moved closer, her eyes sharp as glass. A poor girl suddenly elevated to queen. Your brother receiving the finest medical care in any realm. You claim you want nothing from him, but here you are living in luxury you could never have imagined. Minta met her gaze. I'm here because he asked me. I accepted the trials because I gave my word. If you think I'm unworthy, then test me. But don't pretend this is about protecting Dorian. You want me to fail because you don't believe a human can truly care about a vampire without ulterior motives. For a moment, something flickered in Callista's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. We shall see, she said finally. The first trial begins at dawn. Be ready. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Lady Ashworth, I hope you prove me wrong. Dorian deserves one true thing in his life before he dies. Then she was gone, leaving Minta alone with the weight of tomorrow pressing down like stone. The trial of compassion began in silence. Minta woke at dawn to find new servants in the palace, faces she did not recognize. The familiar staff who had begun to warm to her were gone, replaced by cold-eyed strangers who looked at her with barely concealed contempt. The first sign came at breakfast. The head maid, a sharp-featured vampire named Odette, brought Minta's meal on a chipped plate. The eggs cold, the toast burned. She set it down with unnecessary force, causing the weak tea to slosh over the rim. "Your breakfast, my lady," Odette said, the title dripping with sarcasm. Minta looked at the plate, then at the maid. "Thank you." Odette's eyebrows rose. "No complaint, no demand for better service. The food is fine. It's garbage fit for pigs." Minta picked up her fork. "Then I suppose I'm fortunate to have it." She ate every bite while Odette watched with an expression caught between confusion and contempt. When Minta finished, she carried the plate to the kitchen herself, washed it in the sink, and thanked the cook for the meal. The servants stared at her as if she had grown a second head. The next 14 days followed the same pattern. The new servants tested her in every way they could imagine. They served her spoiled fruit and called it fresh. They forgot to light the fire in her chambers, leaving her to shiver through cold November nights. They gossiped loudly outside her door about gold-digging humans and pathetic charity cases. Minta endured it all without complaint. She thanked them for cold meals. She lit her own fires and learned to sleep beneath extra blankets. When she overheard their cruel words, she said nothing. She simply continued treating them with the same quiet courtesy she had always shown. On the 10th day of the trial, she discovered why Odette was so bitter. It was late evening and Minta could not sleep. She walked the palace corridors, learning their winding paths by moonlight. As she passed the servants' quarters, she heard crying. Soft, desperate, the sound of a mother's fear. Minta followed the sound to a small room where Odette knelt beside a narrow bed. In the bed lay a child no more than 5 years old, a little girl with fever-bright eyes and labored breathing. "Please," Odette was whispering, her voice cracked and broken. "Please, Lily, just hold on. Just one more night." Minta stood in the doorway. "What's wrong with her?" Odette's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock that quickly hardened to hostility. "Get out. This is none of your concern." "I have some medical training," Minta lied. She had none, but she had spent 4 years caring for Jasper, learning what she could. "Let me help." "I don't need help from you." "But Lily might." Their eyes met across the small room. Finally, Odette's shoulders sagged. "She has a fever that won't break. The palace physicians say it's a human illness, nothing they can treat. I've tried everything, but medicine costs money I don't have." Minta knelt beside the bed and placed a hand on the child's forehead. She was burning up, dangerously hot. "I'll be right back," Minta said. She ran to her chambers, grabbed the small purse Dorian had given her for personal expenses, and ran back. She pressed every dollar into Odette's hands. "Get her medicine, whatever she needs. If it's not enough, come find me." Odette stared at the money tears streaming down her face. "Why would you help me? I've been nothing but cruel to you." Minta managed a small smile. "Because Lily doesn't deserve to suffer for choices you made, and neither do you." She left before Odette could respond. For the next 5 nights, Minta returned to that small room after Odette's shift ended. She brought cool cloths for Lily's fever. She told the little girl stories to help her sleep. She sat with Odette in exhausted silence, 2 women bound by fear and love for a child. On the 6th night, Lily's fever broke. On the 7th night, Odette came to Minta's chambers and knelt. "My lady," she said, voice shaking, "I owe you an apology, and my service. You showed me compassion when I deserved none. You saved my daughter without asking for anything in return. I was wrong about you, deeply, shamefully wrong." Minta helped her stand. "You were protecting your child the only way you knew how. There's nothing to forgive." But Odette shook her head. "There's everything to forgive, and I beg you to do so." The next morning, Callista summoned Minta to the throne room. "The trial of compassion is complete," she said simply. "You passed." The royal ball was a nightmare dressed in silk and diamonds. Minta stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom and tried not to hyperventilate. 150 vampire nobles filled the cavernous space, all of them ancient and powerful and completely out of her realm of understanding. The women wore gowns that cost more than houses. The men moved with the lethal grace of predators. And all of them, every single one, turned to stare when she entered. She wore a gown Callista had chosen for her deep green silk that made her feel exposed and ridiculous. Her hair had been styled by palace servants into something elaborate that would not last the hour. She wore the provisional crown, a delicate silver circlet that marked her as queen in name, but not in fact. She had never felt more out of place in her life. Dorian was somewhere in the crowd, but protocol forbade him from helping her. This trial she had to navigate alone. Minta took a deep breath and stepped into the ballroom. The whispers started immediately. She heard them like knives in the dark. "That's her, the human. I heard she was a waitress." poverty written all over her even in silk. How long before she fails? I give her an hour. Minta kept her chin and her eyes forward. She had survived worse than gossip. She had survived Riverside. A server passed with champagne. Minta took a glass more for something to do with her hands than any desire to drink. The crystal felt fragile enough to shatter at a touch. Lady Ashworth. She turned to find a vampire woman gliding toward her, beautiful and cold as winter ice. Her gown was silver, her dark hair piled high, her smile sharp as a blade. I am Duchess Lucinda, the woman said. I'm sure Dorian has mentioned me. He had not. Minta shook her head. Lucinda's smile widened. How interesting. I suppose 300 years of history is easy to forget. We were engaged once, you know. For 50 years, but he broke it off. Said he could never love again after what happened to his first wife. Her eyes glittered. Has he told you about Rosalind? Minta's stomach dropped. No. Of course not. Men never tell their new wives about the ones they murdered. The word hung in the air like poison. Minta felt the champagne glass slip from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, drawing every eye in the room. Oh dear, Lucinda said, all false concern. How clumsy. But I suppose that's to be expected from someone of your background. Minta's face burned. Around them, nobles had stopped their conversations to watch. She could feel their judgment, their amusement, their contempt. I should go, Minta whispered. So soon. But the evening has barely begun. Lucinda raised her voice slightly, addressing the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, our new queen is feeling overwhelmed. Perhaps a dance would settle her nerves. I propose the Queen's Waltz. Tradition dictates the newest queen must lead. Horror flooded through Minta. She had never learned to dance. She had never had the time or money or reason to learn such things. I don't know how, she said quietly. Perfect. Lucinda's eyes gleamed with triumph. Then I shall teach you. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. The crowd formed a circle, trapping Minta in its center. The orchestra struck up a complex waltz, all swirling strings and challenging tempo. Lucinda took Minta's hand in a grip like iron. Try to keep up, she purred. They began to move. Lucinda led with cruel efficiency, spinning Minta through steps she did not know, pushing her off balance, with deliberate precision. Minta stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. The nobles laughed. Lucinda leaned close, her voice a whisper meant only for Minta. You're just like Rosalind, another human replacement for the wife he killed in a moment of bloodlust. Do you really think you're special? Do you really think this ends differently for you? Minta's foot caught on her gown. She fell, landing hard on the marble floor, her crown tumbling from her head and rolling across the ballroom. The laughter grew louder. Minta knelt there, humiliated and hurting, her palms scraped and bleeding from the fall. This was it. She had failed. She could not do this. She was exactly what they all thought. She was worthless girl playing at being a queen. Then she heard the sound of wheels on marble. Jasper appeared at the edge of the circle, not in his old broken wheelchair, but in the motorized one Dorian had given him. He had been recovering in the medical wing, growing stronger every day. He was not supposed to be here tonight, but here he was. He wheeled himself across the dance floor, ignoring the gasps and whispers. When he reached Minta, he held out his hand. Dance with me, he said. Jasper, you can't. Watch me. He helped her stand, his grip steady and sure. Then, with the entire ballroom watching, he began to move. Not walking, not yet, but shifting his weight, using the wheelchair as a partner, guiding Minta through a slow, simple dance that had nothing to do with the waltz and everything to do with love. Brother and sister moved together across the marble floor. Clumsy, imperfect, beautiful. And then Jasper's wheel caught on a crack in the floor. The chair tipped. He fell, landing in a heap beside Minta, his leg braces twisted beneath him. The nobles gasped. Some laughed. Most simply stared. Minta faced a choice in that moment, crystal clear and devastating. She could help Jasper, showing that she prioritized family over appearances. But that would mean failing the trial, proving she could not maintain royal composure under pressure. Or she could leave him there, maintain her dignity, and pass the test, at the cost of her brothers. She looked at Jasper's face, young and brave, and trying not to cry from the pain and embarrassment. Then she knelt beside him and helped him sit up. She straightened his leg braces with gentle hands. She retrieved his wheelchair and supported him as he climbed back in. And then she turned to face the crowd of vampire nobles with her chin high and her voice clear. A queen who abandons family in their moment of need is no queen at all, she said. My brother's dignity matters more than your approval. It always will. Silence fell across the ballroom. Then from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Slow, deliberate. Others joined. Not everyone. Perhaps a third of the nobles. But enough. Callista Mordain stood on the balcony above watching. After a long moment, she nodded once. Trial of grace, complete. The trial of sacrifice came like a knife wrapped in silk. Minta had just finished breakfast when Callista summoned her to the council chamber. She arrived to find the room filled with palace servants, 200 of them standing in nervous rows. Odette was there holding Lily's hand. The cook who had learned to make Minta's tea exactly right. The gardener who had shown her the winter roses. All of them looking at her with fear. Callista stood at the head of the room, her face grave. Lady Ashworth, she began. I regret to inform you that the Nightshade Kingdom faces a financial crisis. Our reserves have been depleted by years of charitable work. We cannot maintain current staffing levels. Minta's heart sank. She knew what was coming. We have two options, Callista continued. First, you can annul your marriage to King Dorian. In exchange, you will receive a settlement of $10 million. The servants will retain their positions. Or second, you can remain married. But we will be forced to terminate the employment of all 200 servants currently in this room. They will lose their positions, their housing within the realm, and their citizenship. They will be exiled to the human world with nothing. The servants began to murmur. Some were crying, others stared at Minta with pleading eyes. Please, my lady, Odette whispered. Lily and I have nowhere to go. My family has served the Nightshade for 3 generations, the cook said. This is our home. $10 million would change your life, a gardener added quietly. You'd never have to worry about money again. Neither would your brother. Minta looked at Callista. This is the trial. Choose between my marriage and their livelihoods. Precisely. You have 1 hour to decide. Minta spent that hour walking the palace gardens thinking. $10 million was more money than she had ever imagined. It could pay for Jasper's medical care for the rest of his life. It could buy them a house security piece. She could leave this impossible world of vampires and trials and return to a human life. But these servants would lose everything. Their homes, their families' legacies, all because she had failed to sacrifice her own comfort. And Dorian would die. The curse would continue. He would fade away, and it would be her fault. When the hour ended, she returned to the council chamber. I have a third option, she said. Callista raised an eyebrow. There is no third option. I make one. Minta pulled off the provisional crown and set it on the table. Everything Dorian has given me, every gift, every piece of jewelry, this crown, the gowns in my chambers. I'm selling all of it. I'll auction the story of this marriage to human publishers. I'll do whatever it takes to raise $10 million. The servants keep their jobs. I keep my marriage, and I keep nothing for myself. Callista stared at her. You would give up your only security. It was never my security, Minta said. It was borrowed. These people's lives aren't. You'll have nothing. No jewels, no fine clothes. You'll be exactly what you were before. Minta smiled, sad but certain. I was never anything but myself. The gowns didn't change that. Over the next 10 days, Minta liquidated everything. The crown sold to a private collector for $2 million. The jewelry auction raised another $4 million. A publisher paid $3 million for the rights to her story. Piece by piece, dollar by dollar, she gave it all away. By day 65, she stood in the council chamber wearing a servant's simple dress, every bit of finery gone. But the 200 servants still had their jobs. Callista's expression was unreadable. There was no financial crisis. This was the test. You passed. The trial of forgiveness broke her heart before it began. On day 70, Callista brought Rowena Ashworth through the veil. Minta's mother stood in the throne room looking small and frightened, and for the first time in a decade sober. Her hands shook, her eyes were clear but haunted. When she saw Minta, she began to cry. Araminta, she whispered. My girl, look at you. Minta could not move, could not breathe. This woman had called her worthless, had beaten her, had blamed her for every misfortune that had befallen their family. This woman had made her childhood a nightmare of fear and shame, and now she stood there crying, and some broken part of Minta still wanted to comfort her. Callista's voice cut through the moment. Lady Ashworth, this is the 4th trial, the trial of forgiveness. Your mother stands accused of years of abuse and neglect. You must pass judgment. Forgive her, and she receives a royal pardon to remain in the kingdom and enter rehabilitation. Condemn her, and she is exiled to the human world with nothing. The choice is yours. Rowena fell to her knees. Minta, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. After your father died, I broke. I couldn't handle the pain, so I drowned it. And I took it out on you. I said terrible things. I did terrible things. I called you worthless because I felt worthless. I blamed you for the accident because I couldn't bear to admit that life is just cruel sometimes. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. Minta stood frozen, years of wounds ripping open. She remembered being 15 and hearing her mother scream that she wished Minta had never been born. She remembered being 17 and coming home to find Rowena passed out, Jasper crying because there was no food in the house. She remembered being 19, broken and guilty after the accident, and having her mother call her a murderer. She remembered all of it. Why now? Minta asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you sorry now when I'm a queen? Where was your sorrow when I was nothing? Rowena looked up, tears streaming down her face. Because I'm sober for the first time in 10 years, and I can finally see what I did to you, what I took from you. I stole your childhood, Minta. I made you raise your brother while I drowned in bottles. I made you believe you were worthless when you were the strongest person I'd ever known. And I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but it's all I have. The throne room was silent. Every vampire present watched Minta with careful eyes, waiting to see what she would choose. Forgiveness or justice? Mercy or punishment? Minta closed her eyes and felt every year of pain wash over her. Then somehow she found words. Mother, she said quietly, I forgive you. Rowena sobbed, but Minta continued and her voice grew stronger. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll stay in the kingdom's recovery hall. You'll earn your redemption through service. And Jasper decides when he's ready to see you. Not me. He's the one you abandoned most completely. His forgiveness is his to give or withhold. She turned to Callista. Is that judgment enough? Callista nodded. Forgiveness with boundaries. The trial of forgiveness is complete. You have passed all 4 trials, Lady Ashworth. The marriage stands. Relief should have flooded through Minta, but Callista's expression stopped her cold. However, the Chancellor continued, there is something you need to know. The council chamber emptied until only Minta, Callista, and Dorian remained. Dorian stood by the window, his back to them, his shoulders tense. Callista's voice was grave. 200 years ago, King Dorian killed his first wife, Queen Rosalind, in a moment of bloodlust. He lost control, newly crowned, and unable to master his vampire nature. When he came to his senses, she was dead in his arms. The words hit like physical blows. Minta looked at Dorian, but he did not turn around. The Vampire Council cursed him, Callista continued. He would fade into nothing unless he found redemption through a soul society deemed worthless, and she forgave him for the murder. But there was a condition. He had to confess the sin himself. If anyone else told the victim, the forgiveness would be void. Understanding crashed over Minta in cold waves. You just told me. Yes. Which means even if I forgive him, it won't break the curse. Because he didn't confess. Correct. I needed you to know the truth before you gave your heart completely. I thought if you knew, you would leave with open eyes rather than wake one day bound to a killer. Dorian spoke, then his voice rough. She was trying to protect you, Minta. From me. I don't need protection from you, Minta said. I need honesty. Then you should have it. Dorian turned to face her, and she saw the full weight of his guilt etched into his ageless face. I killed Rosalind. We had been married 3 days. I thought I could control the bloodlust. I was wrong. When I woke, she was dead. I've spent 200 years trying to atone, but it will never be enough. He crossed to Minta and knelt before her, something a king should never do. I didn't tell you because I am a coward, because I knew if you looked at me the way you're looking at me now with horror and betrayal, I wouldn't survive it. The curse will kill me in 3 weeks, but knowing you hate me would kill me faster. Minta stared down at him, this ancient king brought low by centuries of guilt. She thought of everything he had done for her, for Jasper, for countless others over 200 years. She thought of the man who had seen worth in her when no one else had, and she thought of the monster he had been for one terrible night. I don't hate you, she said finally, but I don't know what I feel. You should have told me. I know. I need time. I understand. She walked away, leaving Dorian kneeling in the council chamber, leaving Callista standing silent witness to a wound that might never heal. In her chambers, Minta found Jasper waiting. He had heard everything. The palace walls were not as thick as people thought. He killed someone, Jasper said quietly, 200 years ago, before he learned control. Does that make it better? I don't know. They sat together in silence, two siblings who had survived so much trying to process one more impossible thing. Finally, Jasper spoke. He's dying, Minta. You have 3 weeks to decide if you can forgive a monster who became a man, or if some sins are too great for redemption. Minta had no answer. The days passed like a countdown to execution. Dorian's condition deteriorated rapidly. His skin, already pale, began to crack like porcelain. His movements grew slower. His eyes dimmed. Minta visited him once on day 87. She found him in his studies surrounded by ledgers that chronicled 200 years of charity, hospitals built, orphanages funded, scholarships given, disasters relieved, an empire of kindness built on a foundation of blood and guilt. I'm sorry, he said when he saw her, for everything, for not telling you, for putting you through the trials, for dragging you into this cursed existence. Stop, Minta said. Stop apologizing. I don't know what else to do. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not a monster, but a man who had carried an unbearable weight for longer than most humans lived. Tell me about Rosalind, she said. So he did. He told her about a woman who had loved books and roses, who had married him despite knowing what he was, who had believed in his goodness even when he did not. He told her about 3 perfect days of marriage, and he told her about the night everything ended. I thought I could resist the bloodlust, he said, his voice breaking. I thought love would be enough. But instinct is older than love, stronger than love. I woke covered in her blood, and I've never forgiven myself. Have you tried? Minta asked. He looked at her confused. Have you tried to forgive yourself? She repeated. Or have you just spent 2 centuries punishing yourself? He had no answer. Minta stood. I need more time. But Dorian, if you die before I figure this out, I'm going to be very angry. Despite everything, he smiled. Noted. On day 90, Callista came to Minta with a journal, old leather pages yellow with age. This belonged to Dorian, she said. He's kept it for 200 years. I thought you should read it. Minta opened to the first entry, dated the day after Rosalind's death. I killed the woman I loved. I will spend eternity ensuring no one else suffers for my sins. She turned pages, hundreds of entries, thousands, all variations on the same theme. Guilt, atonement, service, sacrifice. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Minta reminds me of Rosalind, not in face but in spirit, pure despite pain. I don't deserve her forgiveness. I only pray my death gives her freedom from the burden of knowing me. Minta closed the journal and made her decision. She found Dorian in his chambers, barely conscious, his skin cracking away like ash. She knelt beside his bed and took his failing hand. Dorian, she said, look at me. His eyes opened, gray and fading. You need to confess, she said. The curse requires you to tell me yourself. Callista's words don't count. Only yours, so tell me. Right now, what did you do? Understanding dawned in his eyes. I killed Rosalind, my first wife. I lost control and killed her. And you've spent 200 years atoning. Yes. And you married me not for love, but to give me a life beyond worthlessness. Yes. Minta squeezed his hand. King Dorian Sinclair Thorne I. Araminta Ashworth Thorne, Queen of Nightshade, forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because 200 years of repentance is enough. You've saved thousands, including me. Forgiveness breaks cycles, and I choose to break yours. Light exploded through the room, golden and blinding. The curse shattered with a sound like breaking glass. Dorian gasped as his skin healed the cracks, sealing the color returning. But something else happened too. Something Callista had not mentioned. Dorian's immortality burned away like morning fog. His vampire nature dissolved. In moments, he transformed from ageless king to mortal man, looking exactly 28 years old, breathing and bleeding and heartbreakingly human. What happened? He whispered. Callista appeared in the doorway, her expression sad. The curse's price. You traded eternity for redemption. You're human now, Dorian. Mortal. You have perhaps 50 years left, if you're fortunate. He looked at Minta, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time. I'm nothing now, he said. No kingdom, no power. You're free to annul the marriage. Minta thought of everything she had learned, about strength and worth and the difference between monsters and men. She thought about a girl called Worthless who had become a queen. And she thought about a king who had given up forever for the chance to be good. I didn't marry a king, she said. I married Dorian, and 50 years as equals is worth more than 500 years of distance. She leaned down and kissed him, gentle and sure. Besides, she whispered against his lips, we still have one trial left. What trial? She smiled. The trial of proving to Riverside that I was never worthless at all. The decision to return to Riverside came on day 100, exactly 10 days after Dorian's transformation from immortal king to mortal man. They stood together in the palace gardens, watching winter roses bloom in defiance of the season, and Minta felt the pull of unfinished business like a thread wrapped around her heart. I need to go back, she said. Dorian, still adjusting to the strangeness of breathing and feeling cold, turned to her. To Riverside? Yes. Why, they've done nothing but hurt you. She touched one of the white roses, its petals soft as silk. Because I left as a girl they called worthless. I need to return as the woman I've become. Not for revenge, for closure. For every person in that town who's been told they don't matter. He studied her face, this woman who had saved him from centuries of guilt, who had chosen compassion over cruelty again and again. Then we go together. You don't have to. You're free now. The curse is broken. You could go anywhere, be anyone. I could, he agreed, but I choose to stand beside you, if you'll have me. She took his hand, warm now instead of cold, mortal instead of eternal. Always. They spent the next week preparing, not with elaborate plans or strategies, but with quiet conversations about what they wanted to say and how they wanted to say it. Minta did not want vengeance. She had seen enough cruelty to last a lifetime. But she wanted truth. She wanted the people of Riverside to understand what their words had cost and what their judgment had failed to see. Jasper insisted on coming. He was walking now, slowly and with leg braces, but walking nonetheless. 4 months of vampire medical treatment had accomplished what doctors said was impossible. He took halting steps across the palace gardens, his face bright with determination and joy. I want to be there, he said, when you show them who you really are. I want them to see what they tried to destroy. Rowena asked to come too. She had been sober for 4 months, living in the recovery hall, attending counseling sessions, working in the palace kitchens to earn her keep. When Minta visited her, she barely recognized her mother. Rowena's eyes were clear. Her hands were steady. The perpetual cloud of alcohol and rage had lifted, revealing a woman who was broken, but trying to heal. I want to apologize, Rowena said. To you, to Jasper, to anyone who heard the terrible things I said. I want to stand there and tell the truth about what I did. Minta looked at her mother and felt something complicated move through her chest. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. You can come, but Jasper decides if he's ready to hear you. Jasper thought about it for a long time. Finally, he nodded. She can come, but she stands in the back. This is Minta's day, not hers. Callista Mordain came to see them off the night before they left. She found Minta in the library packing books she wanted to bring to Riverside, planning to start a small lending library for people who could not afford to buy their own. Lady Ashworth, Callista said, may I speak with you? Minta set down the book she was holding. Of course. Callista crossed to the window and looked out at the nightshade kingdom spreading beneath them, all crystal light and shadow. I owe you an apology. You've already apologized. Not adequately. Callista turned to face her. I instituted the trials because I did not believe a human could truly care for Dorian without ulterior motives. I've watched for 200 years as people used his guilt against him, taking his money and his kindness and giving nothing in return. I thought you would be the same. But I wasn't. No, you were nothing like them. You sacrificed everything. You forgave the unforgivable. You proved that worth has nothing to do with power or bloodline or immortality. Callista's voice softened. You taught me something I should have learned centuries ago. That compassion is not weakness. That mercy is not foolishness. That sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose kindness when the world offers every reason to choose cruelty. Minta did not know what to say. Callista smiled, small but genuine. You're going to be a remarkable queen, not of vampires, of yourself, and that's the only kingdom that truly matters. She left before Minta could respond, sweeping from the library like winter wind, leaving only the scent of frost and the echo of words that felt like benediction. They left for Riverside at dawn on day 110. The journey back was strange and significant. They traveled not in the 8 black carriages that had announced Dorian's kingship at the wedding, but in a single coach, simple and unadorned. Dorian insisted on it. We're not going as royalty, he said. We're going as people who learned that titles mean nothing without character. Minta sat beside him in the coach, watching the landscape change from the strange twilight realm around Nightshade to the familiar rolling hills of the human world. Jasper dozed across from them, his head against the window, his leg braces carefully positioned. Rowena sat in the very back, quiet and nervous, as her hands clasped tight in her lap. As they drew closer to Riverside, Minta felt her stomach tighten with nerves. What if no one came? What if they laughed again? What if facing her past broke something in her that the trials had not touched? Dorian sensed her fear. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Why? She thought about all the years she had bowed her head and apologized for existing. She thought about every time someone had called her worthless, and she had believed them. She thought about the girl who had sat on the fire escape and wondered if the world would miss her if she disappeared. Because that girl deserves to know she was wrong, Minta said, the one who thought she didn't matter. She needs to see that she was always worth something, even when no one else could see it. The coach crested the final hill, and Riverside spread before them. The town looked exactly as she remembered. The church steeple rising above modest houses. The diner where she had worked impossible hours. The town square where she had been publicly humiliated and arrested. Home, or what used to be home. What would never be home again. They stopped at the edge of town. A messenger had been sent ahead 3 days prior requesting a town gathering in the square. The message had been simple. Araminta Ashworth Thorne requests the honor of addressing the people of Riverside. All are welcome. Callista had wanted to phrase it as a royal summons, mandatory attendance under vampire law. Minta had refused. If they come by choice, she had said. I won't force anyone to listen. Now as the coach door opened and Minta stepped down onto familiar cobblestones, she wondered if anyone would be there at all. The town square was packed. 300 people, maybe more, filled every available space. They stood on the steps of the church. They leaned against the fountain. They crowded the sidewalks and spilled into the streets. Every resident of Riverside had come drawn by curiosity or gossip or the human need to witness spectacle. Minta's breath caught. She had expected a handful. She had expected mockery. She had not expected this. Isolde Merriweather stood in the front row, elegant as always, in a wool coat worth more than most people's cars. Her expression was smug, satisfied. She had clearly come expecting entertainment. Beside her stood Officer Brennan, looking uncomfortable. The baker, Mrs. Chen. The mailman. The diner owner who had fired her. Everyone who had turned their backs when she needed help. Everyone who had called her worthless. A makeshift platform had been erected in front of the fountain, just a few wooden boards raised 3 feet off the ground. Nothing fancy, nothing royal, just a place to stand so everyone could see. Dorian helped Minta up the steps. He did not join her on the platform. This was her moment, not his. Jasper stood at the base, leaning on his crutches, his young face fierce with pride. Rowena hung back near the coach, barely visible, her shoulders hunched with shame. Callista Mordain materialized from the crowd like a shadow-given form. She wore her midnight blue gown and an expression of quiet authority. She climbed onto the platform and raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. People of Riverside, Callista said, her voice carrying across the square with supernatural clarity. You are gathered here at the request of Lady Araminta Ashworth Thorne, Queen Consort of Nightshade, Victor, of the 4 Trials, Breaker of the Ancient Curse. She has traveled far to speak with you. I suggest you listen. She stepped back, yielding the platform to Minta. 300 pairs of eyes turned to stare, waiting, judging, already deciding what they thought before she opened her mouth. Minta stood there in a simple blue dress, no crown, no jewelry, no symbols of wealth or power, just herself. The girl from Riverside who had cleaned their tables and washed their clothes and apologized for taking up space. She took a breath and began to speak. My name is Araminta Ashworth, she said. Most of you know me as Minta. Some of you know me as that worthless heart girl. The thief, the bad luck, the girl who wasn't worth remembering. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isolde's smile grew wider. I'm not here for revenge, Minta continued. I'm not here to punish anyone or demand apologies. I'm here because I spent 23 years in this town believing what you told me about myself. And I need you to understand what that did. The murmurs quieted. When I was 15, my father died in the mining accident. My mother started drinking. I started working 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I was a child raising a child, and every single day I came to this town and begged for work, for kindness, for help. And every single day you turned me away. She saw faces in the crowd beginning to shift. Discomfort, shame, recognition. When I was 19, I had a car accident. My brother Jasper was paralyzed. The doctor said he'd never walk again. I carried the guilt of that every moment of every day, and you made sure I never forgot it. You called it divine punishment. You said our family was cursed. You said we deserved our suffering. Mrs. Chen looked at her feet. The mailman studied his hands. When I was 23, Isolde Merriweather accused me of stealing her silver brooch. Isolde's smile faltered. She had her servant planted in my apron pocket. Then she had me arrested in front of the entire town. You all watched. Some of you laughed. Some of you chanted worthless, while my brother bled on the cobblestones after someone pushed his wheelchair. The square had gone completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I spent that night in jail. I lost both my jobs. I couldn't find work anywhere in town. We were going to be evicted. We were going to lose everything. And not one person in this square offered to help. Minta's voice grew stronger, not with anger, but with certainty. I tell you this, not to make you feel guilty. Guilt changes nothing. I tell you this so you understand what your words cost. When you call someone worthless, you don't just insult them. You teach them to believe it. You plant a seed of shame that grows until they can't see anything else. You steal their ability to recognize their own value. She paused, letting the words settle. But here's what you didn't understand. Here's what you got wrong. She looked across the crowd, meeting eyes refusing to let them look away. My worth was never yours to give or take. It was never determined by your approval or your judgment. It existed before you noticed me, and it will exist long after you've forgotten my name. Because worth is not something granted by others. It's something we claim for ourselves. Someone in the back of the crowd began to cry. Minta could not see who. I met a man who saw that, who looked at me, this girl you all called worthless, and saw strength, saw dignity, saw someone worth knowing. Not because I was perfect, not because I had money or status or beauty, but because I chose kindness when the world gave me every reason to choose bitterness. She gestured to Dorian standing at the base of the platform. This is Dorian Thorne. Some of you met him at our wedding. You laughed when he married me. You assumed he was using me or mocking me or playing some cruel joke. You could not imagine that someone might genuinely care about a girl like me. Dorian's expression was calm, but his eyes held steel. Dorian was a king, immortal, wealthy beyond measure, and he gave it all up. He traded eternity for mortality. He gave away his power, his title, his kingdom. Why? Because he learned the same lesson I did. That worth has nothing to do with what you own or how long you live or who bows when you walk by. It has everything to do with who you are when no one's watching, what you do with the power you have, how you treat people who can't offer you anything in return. Minta looked directly at Isolde Merriweather. You framed me for theft because you could, because you enjoyed watching someone powerless squirm, because cruelty entertained you. Isolde's face had gone pale. You're not going to jail for that, Minta said. I'm not going to sue you or ruin you or take revenge. Do you know why? Isolde shook her head mutely. Because revenge would mean I still care what you think of me. It would mean I'm still seeking your validation, still trying to prove something to you. And I'm done with that. You don't get to matter to me anymore. Your opinion is worthless. And that's the only justice I need. She turned to address the whole crowd again. I came back here to tell you something important. Something I wish someone had told me when I was 15 and scrubbing floors until my hands bled. Something I hope you'll tell your children and grandchildren. Her voice rose clear and strong. You are not worthless. Not a single one of you. Not the poor, not the broken. Not the ones society overlooks or dismisses or discards. Your value is inherent. It doesn't come from money or status or other people's approval. It comes from your choice every single day to be kind or cruel, to help or harm, to see the humanity in others or reduce them to their worst moments. Tears were streaming down many faces now. The diner owner, the baker, even Officer Brennan. I forgive you, Minta said, and the words echoed across the square like a bell. All of you, not because you've earned it, but because forgiveness is the only thing that breaks cycles of pain. I forgive you for calling me worthless, for turning away when I needed help, for teaching me to hate myself. I forgive you because holding on to that anger would make me exactly what you always said I was. Small, bitter, less than. She smiled, sad but genuine. But forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what you did was okay. It means I'm choosing to move forward without the weight of your judgment chained to my ankles. Minta stepped back, preparing to leave the platform. Then she remembered one more thing. "Oh," she said, "and for anyone wondering, my brother Jasper is walking again." The doctors said it was impossible. They were wrong. "Jasper, would you come up here?" Jasper handed his crutches to Dorian and slowly, carefully climbed the steps to the platform. Every eye in the square watched as he took one step, then another, his leg braces supporting him, but his own strength carrying him forward. When he reached Minta, he threw his arms around her. The crowd gasped. Some burst into applause. Others simply stared in shock. Minta hugged her brother tight, and together they walked down the platform steps, leaving Riverside behind for the last time. But before they could reach the coach, a voice called out from the crowd. "Wait!" Rowena Ashworth pushed through the gathered people, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking. She climbed onto the platform where Minta had just stood and turned to face the town. "My name is Rowena Ashworth," she said, her voice trembling, but clear. "I'm Minta's mother, and I'm an alcoholic." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "For 10 years I drank to forget that my husband died and left me alone with 2 children I didn't know how to raise. I drank to numb the pain of living in a town that judged every mistake. I drank because it was easier than facing what I'd become." She looked at Minta standing by the coach. "And I took it out on my daughter. I called her worthless. I told her she ruined our family. I blamed her for the accident that paralyzed Jasper, even though it was just that, an accident. I hid her. I neglected her. I made her believe she was nothing." Rowena's voice broke. "Every cruel thing you people said to her, I said worse. Every door you closed in her face, I closed first. I was her mother, and I treated her like she was the enemy. Like she was the reason I hurt instead of the only reason I had to stop hurting." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I'm 4 months sober now. I'm getting help. I'm trying to be better. But I can never undo the damage I did. I can never give Minta back the childhood I stole. All I can do is stand here and tell you the truth. That girl you called worthless, she raised her brother while I drowned in bottles. She worked 3 jobs while I took every penny for alcohol. She survived things that would have broken grown men, and she did it with more grace and kindness than I ever showed her." Rowena looked at Jasper. "I'm sorry, son, for everything, for not being there, for not protecting you, for letting you down when you needed me most." Then she looked at Minta. "And I'm sorry to you, baby girl. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but it's all I have. I'm sorry. And I'm trying. And I hope someday you might see me as something other than the worst thing that ever happened to you." She stepped down from the platform and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The square remained silent for a long moment. Then Jasper spoke, his voice carrying across the space. "I forgive you, Mom." Rowena stopped, turned, stared at her son with disbelief and desperate hope. "I forgive you," Jasper repeated. "Not today, not all at once, but I'm willing to try if you keep trying too." Rowena collapsed to her knees in the middle of the square and sobbed. 2 women from the crowd, mothers themselves, moved to help her up and guide her to a bench. Minta watched it all and felt something loosen in her chest. Not complete healing, not yet, but the beginning of it, the possibility of it. Callista stepped forward, then her voice ringing with authority. "The Nightshade Dominion has made certain decisions regarding Riverside." The crowd tensed, expecting punishment, royal decrees, supernatural vengeance. First, Callista said, "King Dorian Thorne has established a foundation in his wife's name. The Worthless No More Foundation will provide $20 million in funding for this town. A new hospital wing, upgraded schools, a community center, scholarships for those who cannot afford higher education, support services for addiction and mental health." Gasps echoed across the square. $20 million, more money than the town had seen in its entire history. Second, Callista continued, "there will be consequences for those who abuse their power. Mrs. Isolde Merriweather will not face criminal charges for her false accusation. However, a full investigation of her business practices will be conducted. Any violations of labor law, tax fraud, or other illegal activities will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Additionally, the Nightshade Foundation will fund a competing textile mill with fair wages and safe working conditions. The people of Riverside will decide which business they wish to support." Isolde's face went from pale to ashen. Her empire, built on exploitation and cruelty, would finally face real competition. Third, what Callista said, "Officer Brennan will be required to undergo additional training in civil rights and proper police procedure. His department will receive oversight from an independent commission. The days of selective enforcement are over." Officer Brennan nodded slowly, looking relieved that his punishment was not more severe. Finally, Callista said, Riverside will receive support not as a gift, but as an investment. You will be expected to use these resources wisely, to build a community where no child goes hungry, where no family loses their home because of medical bills, where no one is called worthless because they lack money or status. She paused, letting her words sink in. Lady Araminta Thorne could have demanded your destruction. She chose your redemption instead. I suggest you prove her faith was not misplaced. The crowd began to disperse slowly, quietly. Some people approached Minta, tears in their eyes, apologizing for their cruelty. She accepted their apologies with grace, but did not linger. This was not about absolution for them. It was about freedom for her. Mrs. Chen pressed a loaf of bread into her hands. I should have given you this 10 years ago. I'm sorry. The mailman said, my daughter struggles with depression. She calls herself worthless. I'm going to tell her your story, if that's okay. Minta nodded. Tell her she matters, even when it doesn't feel like it, especially then. As they prepared to leave, Isolde Merriweather approached. Her usual arrogance had crumbled, leaving behind a woman who looked older and smaller than before. I suppose you're satisfied, Isolde said quietly. Minta looked at her, this woman who had tormented her for years. No, I'm sad. Sad that you spent your wealth and power making people feel small instead of lifting them up. That you'll die one day having wasted every advantage on cruelty. That's not satisfaction. That's tragedy. Isolde had no response. She turned and walked away, her shoulders bowed, looking every one of her 60 years. Minta climbed into the coach. Dorian sat beside her, taking her hand. Jasper settled across from them, exhausted but smiling. Rowena rode in a separate carriage, giving them space. As they pulled away from Riverside, Minta looked back one last time at the town that had shaped her in fire and pain. Are you okay? Dorian asked softly. She leaned against his shoulder. I think I will be. They returned to Nightshade Palace to find preparations underway for a coronation. Not for Minta or Dorian, but for Callista Mordain. The Vampire Council had voted unanimously. With Dorian's abdication and his transformation to human, the kingdom needed a new ruler. Callista, who had served as royal chancellor for 600 years, was the clear choice. The coronation took place in the Grand Hall, witnessed by nobles from across the supernatural realm. Callista knelt before the ancient council, and they placed upon her head the crown of Nightshade, heavy with history and responsibility. Rise, Queen Callista, the first, the eldest counselor intoned, sovereign of the Nightshade realm. Callista rose, resplendent in midnight robes, the crown catching the crystal light. Her first act as monarch was to address Minta and Dorian. Lady Araminta Thorne, you pass the 4 trials of the crown. By rights, this crown should be yours. Minta stepped forward. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't want it. A ripple of shock moved through the assembled nobles. I want to be myself, Minta said. I spent 23 years being told who I should be. I don't need a crown to prove my worth. I just need to live according to my own values. She smiled at Callista. You'll be a far better queen than I ever could. Callista descended from the throne and embraced Minta. Thank you, she whispered, for teaching me that power should serve others, not itself. The ceremony ended with celebration that lasted through the night. But Minta and Dorian slipped away before midnight, finding quiet in the palace gardens, where winter roses bloomed eternal. No regrets, Dorian asked, pulling her close. None, she said. What now? She had been thinking about that for days. We go back to the human world. We find a small town, we open a bookstore, we help people who need it. We live simply. We grow old together. I'm mortal now, he reminded her. I'll age. I'll get sick. I'll die. I know. You could stay here. Callista would grant you extended life. Minta looked up at him. I don't want centuries. I want 50 years with you. 50 real years with seasons and birthdays and ordinary days that mean everything because we're living them together. That's worth more than immortality. He kissed her, then deep and sure. When they finally pulled apart, they found Jasper waiting. The doctors say I might not need these in another 6 months, he said, gesturing to his leg braces. I want to stay here, study medicine, learn how vampires heal, maybe find ways to help other people like me. Minta's heart squeezed. Are you sure? You spent years taking care of me, he said. Let me take care of others. She hugged him fiercely. I'm so proud of you. Mom wants to stay too, in the recovery hall. She says she needs more time to heal. That's her choice, Minta said. I'll visit, often. 6 months later, Minta and Dorian opened a bookstore in a small town called Millbrook. The shop was modest, tucked between a bakery and a flower shop. They called it the Worthy Page. On opening day, Minta stood behind the counter and watched people browse the shelves. Regular people, workers and parents and students. She was just Minta, the bookstore owner, Dorian's wife, and that was exactly what she wanted to be. A young girl came to the counter with a worn copy of a fantasy novel, counting out coins carefully. She was maybe 13, dressed in clothes that had been mended many times, her expression guarded. "I only have $3, the girl said quietly. "I know the book costs 5. I can come back when I have more." Minta smiled. "Actually, we have a special today. Any book $3. Consider yourself lucky." The girl's face lit up like sunrise. "Really, Imba? Really?" As the girl left clutching her book like treasure, Dorian came up behind Minta and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're going to give away more books than you sell," he said. "Probably. We'll go out of business in a year. Maybe. Oh, worth it." She turned in his arms and kissed him. "Absolutely." They built a life in Millbrook, simple, quiet, filled with books and coffee and long walks through town where nobody knew their history. Jasper visited twice a year, arriving through the veil in medical scrubs, excited to share his research. He was running now, publishing papers that would change medicine if the human world ever learned about them. Rowena visited once, 18 months sober. She apologized again. Minta forgave her again. They had coffee and talked about small things, building something fragile and new. Callista sent letters written in elegant script. She ruled Nightshade with wisdom, transforming the kingdom into a beacon of cooperation between humans and vampires. One letter arrived on Minta's 25th birthday. "You taught me that the crown does not make the queen. The queen makes the crown. Thank you." 5 years after leaving Nightshade, Minta stood in the bookstore at closing time and looked around at what they had built. The shelves were full. The reading corner had soft chairs where elderly customers dozed. The children's section had a mural Dorian had painted. They had started a free literacy program, a book club for lonely seniors, story time for kids whose parents worked long hours. They had created a space where people felt welcome, where worth was never questioned. It was not a kingdom. It was better. Dorian locked the front door and found Minta standing by the window watching snowfall. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy," she said simply. "I spent so many years believing I was worthless, and now I know the truth." "What truth?" She leaned against him. "That I always had worth, from the moment I was born to the moment I'll die. It was never about what other people saw or didn't see. It was always there waiting for me to recognize it in myself. And now I see it clearly, in every kindness I choose, every book I put into the hands of a child who needs an escape, every moment I spend building a life I'm proud of. Worth isn't granted or earned, it just is, and I am worthy. Not because I passed trials or broke curses or became a queen, but because I exist, and I choose every day to be the best version of myself." Dorian kissed her temple. "You're extraordinary." "No," she said, smiling. "I'm ordinary, and that's the most extraordinary thing I've learned. That ordinary people who choose kindness are the real royalty. That worth doesn't come from titles or wealth or power. It comes from here." She pressed her hand to her heart, "And no one can take that away. Not ever." They stood together in the bookstore as snow blanketed Millbrook in white. Outside, the town was settling in for the evening, lights glowing in windows, families gathering around dinner tables. Regular people living regular lives, each one carrying infinite worth, whether they knew it or not. Minta had been called worthless. The Vampire King had called her queen, but she had learned the most important truth of all. She had always been worthy, from the very beginning, from the first breath to the last. Worthy not because someone else said so, but because she chose to believe it. And in the end, that belief changed everything.